Okay, this is live now. It is Saturday night, March 20th, and it's about 6 o'clock on the West Coast. I'm recording from Huntington Beach in Orange County. It's a little red dot, I'd say, in the communist state of California. These lockdowns have been a torture for us. But one of the things that I get to do is I get to watch the news all the time. And I get to read stories, and I get to watch things on the computer and I follow it. After 26 years on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, I was a news junkie since I was 20 years old. Okay, and of course I followed all the economic news that came out every day from 8:30. Excuse me, Ella, you be a good girl. So I followed all the economic news from 8:30, and that comes out at 8:30 in the morning for 26 years. So I'm well aware of how the economy is doing, and on a quarterly basis, on a monthly basis, and on a yearly basis. And I want to talk to you about how we were doing pre-pandemic. So how are we doing in 2019 and January, February of 2020? And the truth of the matter is, we were at 3% growth. We were going to increase to 4% growth. I'll get back to that in a second. But at the time, non-farm payrolls came out in March, early March, 4 February. We went to 3.5% unemployment rate. The unemployment rate was at a 50-year low, historic lows for African Americans and Hispanic Americans. CPI was down, not down, literally down, but very, very low, below 1%, let's say. Payrolls were up. People were making more money and keeping more of their money. And that was true for the lowest end of the income scales to the high end of the income scales. So it was a beautiful economy, like an engine. It was in third or fourth gear, and it was ready to shift gears. Why do I say it was going to shift gears? Two things happened at the tail end of 2019 that you have to keep track of. This is why you can listen to Peter Navarro, you can listen to Larry Kudlow. They'll give you tremendous statistics about how good we were, but they leave this part out. The USMCA was finally ratified by all three countries in the second half of 2019. Canada was the last country to do so. Also, the China-US trade deal was signed in Washington on January 5th, I believe. A man named Liu came and signed it with President Trump. That could have been a really big red flag we missed. We were told Chairman Xi couldn't come because of a domestic situation. Wonder what that was. I'll tell you what that was. Now, so I've already described to you how good we were doing in 2019, 2020, and we were going to accelerate in 2020. What Mr. Kudlow and Mr. Navarro, my professors, haven't mentioned recently is to remind you of the fact that in 2019, China had their worst year in 67 years. 67 years. Let me repeat that. 67 years. So if we're going to do better in 2020 and they're doing worse in 2019, they're going to do worse in 2020. We're going to continue to repatriate American companies to manufacture in the United States. President Trump's economic policies was drawing manufacturing in. He cut corporate tax rates. He cut regulations. He fixed the problem at the border where there was no more illegal immigration. But we had legal immigration. And we were going to increase legal immigration, in my opinion, because to meet the demands. And still, inflation was kept low in the United States, and payrolls were rising, and the economy was expanding. But China had their worst year in 67 years, and 2020 was going to be even worse. So, what did China do? Well, they study us very well. If you listen to what they said to Blinken just this past weekend, you know they threw the Democrat policies right in his face. I understand Trump would have walked away. He should have been recalled right after that tirade. Okay? So, do you remember what Clyburn said? Never let a crisis go to waste. And he got it from somewhere else, but that's another story. So China had a crisis they didn't want to waste. So they were doing research in the lab in Wuhan that's coming out. More and more is coming out about this type of research every day. And they shut down Wuhan. They shut down the Hubei province, I believe it's called, that Wuhan is in. They couldn't go to Peking. They couldn't go to Beijing. If you were in Beijing, you couldn't go to Wuhan. But if you're in that province, the Hubei province, which Wuhan is in, you can go to Milan. You can go to New York. You can go to LA and San Francisco. And you can go to Washington, D.C. They unleashed a global pandemic on the world for economic reasons. Now, normally, in a great podcast by Rudy Giuliani, Common Sense, told me, and I should also mention I get a lot of my stuff from Stephen K. Bannon in the War Room, but the problem with what they're all saying is with what they're leaving out. So what Rudy said was, this should have united us. After 9/11, we were united. And one of the reasons we're not united, he goes on to explain, is the lack of God. At 9/11, we all went to masses. We went to memorial masses. During COVID, they shut down churches. But that's not it. It was an election year. And the Democrats, just like China, didn't want to let the crisis go to waste. So they didn't unite. They tried to call it the Trump virus. And that's ridiculous. This was a global pandemic unleashed by the CCP in China. Now, I want to put this out there right away because the thing that made me do this video is what happened in Atlanta and the way the Biden administration, I use an asterisk every time, the asterisk Biden administration, what they did was they tried to put it on racial terms when it clearly, the police and the FBI are saying it was more about his sex addiction than the racial tones. And there are problems. I've seen tapes of African American people hitting, and I don't mean to disparage all African Americans, it's just a handful of people knocking down older Asian people. We have no right to take any action against anybody that's in the United States that's of Chinese descent. Let me be clear. We don't, as individuals, touch the Chinese citizens that are probably really good and beautiful people. I can only go from my personal experience. I've had that experience. China people are not to blame. The CCP is to blame. And this administration is not going to take that stand. They did not unite when they should have united. So don't cry me a river that we're not uniting with you right now. This was a global attack by the CCP. Did I make that clear? They had their worst year in 67 years. They were going to have another bad year, and they unleashed that CCP Wuhan virus. They love to call it coronavirus, COVID-19. They got 1,000 names for it, but it's the CCP Wuhan virus. Signing out.